Well, welcome to the 700 Club, and thanks so much for joining with us. Democrats have come out on top in the battle for the Senate after victories in Arizona and Nevada over the weekend. Republicans are still hoping to flip the House.
The GOP is scrambling to figure out what went wrong and bickering over who's to blame for the red wave that wasn't. Dale Hurd has the details.
Members of the upcoming 118th Congress are arriving in Washington to an uncertain post-election landscape, with control of the House still undecided and party leadership in flux. Republicans are expected to win the 6 seats needed to capture the House majority. But Democratic Senate wins in Arizona and Nevada keeps the Senate under Democratic control, with some calling the election results a rejection of GOP extremism.
This election, Nevadans rejected the far-right politicians working to divide us.
I'm incredibly pleased by the turnout, and I think it's a reflection of the quality of our candidates.
Republicans are trying to figure out how, despite one of the worst economies in decades and one of the most unpopular presidents in recent times, the predicted red wave fizzled. Now begins the finger-pointing among Republicans and the scramble for party leadership. Some blame Trump-backed candidates losing as the reason for Republican losses, and some blame Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell.
There's probably a greater likelihood the House flips than the Senate. Candidate quality has a lot to do with the outcome.
Republican Senator Bill Cassidy, who voted to impeach former President Trump, says he supports Senator Mitch McConnell to continue as leader.
We have to be a party about the future. And so if we're talking about the future, the American voter, she'll make her choice.
Party of the future is another way of saying no more Donald Trump in 2024. Meanwhile, Republicans are still hoping to flip Georgia's Senate seat in a December runoff.
The most important thing we can do is elect Herschel Walker to make sure that we can keep the pressure on Democrats in the Senate.
Even if Walker wins, Vice President Kamala Harris will still cast the deciding vote. In the House, some are questioning whether Republican Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy has enough support to become Speaker. In a scenario deemed unthinkable just a week ago, Speaker Nancy Pelosi is still hoping for a miracle that would allow her to retain her post.
We don't pray for a victory. I grew up in a political family. You don't pray for the victory, but you pray that God's will be done.
Meanwhile, former President Donald Trump is still expected to formally announce his 2024 presidential run Tuesday night, even though some are calling on him to wait. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Well, I was hoping for a pause before we all start looking at 2024. It doesn't look like we're going to get it. And even in the middle of, we can't even count the ballots. I don't know what's going on at the county level or the state level or the district level that is impeding the count, but this thing needs to end. So whatever it takes by 2024, can you please get your act together so we can actually figure out who won the election? In other news, President Biden and China's president are holding a historic meeting in Indonesia today. John Jessup has more on that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
Thanks, Gordon. It is their first in-person meeting since the president took office nearly 2 years ago. The two leaders aim to manage differences between the superpowers as they compete for global influence amid increasing economic and security tensions. The meeting is a sidebar of the Group of 20 summit of the world's largest economies. They sat down for what was expected to be a conversation lasting several hours. Before the meeting, Biden said they have to figure out what are the most important things to each of us going into the next 2 years. Well, while the administration grapples with curbing the global influence of China, a group of college students taking on the CCP here in the United States is getting attention. National security correspondent Caitlin Burke brings us the story.
This student-led network is simple and direct. Remove the influence of the Chinese Communist Party from American college campuses.
The CCP isn't content to have total control over speech and thought in its own territory. It also wants to export the system of government abroad. And our universities are among its top targets, young people in particular.
John Metz, president of the Athena Institute, launched this campaign to educate students on the threat and help free academia from the CCP agenda.
So we're asking universities to do three things. Stop taking money from the CCP and its proxies, stop investing in companies linked to the worst of the Chinese government's human rights abuses, and disclose any and all financial entanglements with entities in the People's Republic of China.
In 2021, Catholic University of America became the first school to commit to auditing its endowment for links to companies tied to China and its human rights abuses. Since then, Atheni chapters have spread to campuses nationwide.
Students have been the ones who've been willing to say, our university shouldn't be taking millions of dollars from a government that's committing genocide at home and seeking to silence free speech here in the U.S.
For years, retired General Robert Spalding has sounded the alarm about China's efforts to expand its system of government internationally. His main point being it's not just academia that needs to break ties.
They have so become a part of our business and financial and academic and political systems that if we don't get the Chinese Communist Party out of the country, that means they cannot have any contact with any university system, any corporation, any financial system, institution, any politician. If we don't decouple, then we end up dying the slow death where we lose touch with our principles and values that are established in the Constitution and slowly begin to lose our democracy.
A recent State Department report found that the CCP specifically targets young people to manipulate public opinion. The strategy being that if you can influence the way the next generation thinks, you can prevent them from taking action. The Atheni movement is a sign that that strategy has been blunted, with students already on the front lines of the fight to preserve democracy. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Washington.
All right. Thank you, Caitlin. Well, here in Washington, U.S. Customs and Border Protection Commissioner Chris Mangus resigned his post over the weekend. His departure coming after a brief standoff with DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. President Biden accepted his resignation and thanked Mangus for nearly 40 years of public service in law enforcement. His 11-month tenure was rocky as the agency faced criticism from different directions. On one hand, over its treatment of migrants. On the other, calls for tougher border protection as a record number of immigrants crossed the border illegally this year. Well, to the war in Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky visited the recently liberated city of Kherson today. The Russians withdrew in the latest setback to Vladimir Putin's invasion. As Chuck Holton reports, American-supplied weapons are making a big difference on the battlefield.
After Kherson was abandoned by the Russian army, Ukrainian soldiers entering the city were immediately ambushed, though not by the enemy. Beleaguered residents rushed them with tearful hugs and kisses. Not long before, civilians shouted at the last Russian troops fleeing for the east bank of the Dnieper River. As soon as they had gone, these young people set about tearing down posters the Russians had put up.
You have to have something which you live for, and this was the moment to live for. Liberation is not something happening every year. It's something in 5 generations, and it's a moment to stay.
For residents who suffered under Russian occupation, the last 9 months have been full of terror.
We knew only fear. We were afraid of everything. We were afraid of the sound of cars. We were afraid of using our telephones. We were hiding everything. We were hiding our kids.
More atrocities come to light with each passing mile, and Ukrainian authorities plan to thoroughly investigate them all. Kherson was spared destruction seen in other battles because the liberation came without the brutal house-to-house fighting normally required to dislodge an entrenched enemy. They did it by the clever use of 2 particular weapons, and you might be surprised to find most of the fighting was being done from underground. I visited the front lines in Kherson during the last days of the battle.
If you're a soldier in this conflict, the most dangerous thing that can happen is being seen by the enemy, because if they know where you are, they can shoot you. So I'm embedded with a unit right on the front lines, and I want to show you their headquarters, but I have to be very careful about how I do that so that I don't give away their position.
Miles from Russian troops, deep in a hand-dug bunker, commanders monitor troop movements via a fleet of off-the-shelf drones broadcasting over a Starlink internet connection. Once an enemy tank is identified, the location is relayed to an artillery unit, which loads a GPS-guided artillery shell provided by the United States. The results speak for themselves. Now, experts say Russia's options are decreasing rapidly.
So missile attacks is pretty much the only thing they have to make Ukraine suffer, but that tactic is not working. And we have seen since Russia destroyed almost 40% of Ukrainian energy grid, Ukraine still maintains its functioning, and Western assistance is actually increasing, not decreasing.
But here in Kherson, it will be a long time before things get back to normal.
It's difficult to live here. There is no water, no electricity, no heating. It's freezing. There is no internet. We are surviving the best we can.
While residents are eager to rebuild, now is the time to celebrate. It might be almost winter, but for the people of Ukraine, today feels like springtime. From Kherson, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.
Gordon, the joy and the relief in those faces, you can tell that this is really a turning point under the Russian occupation there.
It is a turning point, and so let's turn to Terry. You've got staff members, Orphans Promise staff in Kherson.
And that whole eastern region, but everybody's, been hiding up until this point. The joy of these people is contagious, isn't it? It just makes you want to grab a flag and dance. And their heart, to me, the heart of the Ukrainian people is astonishing. I mean, to endure, winter is coming and it's cold there, and no water, no electricity. It's going to be a rough winter, but they will survive it. They are just unbelievably steadfast.
My hope is that story or stories like it get broadcast in Russia so the Russian people can see what has happened, that they view themselves as now liberated because the Russian army has withdrawn. And
that some of these Russian soldiers who we see going back into their country now, many of them were walking across the base of a damaged bridge, retreating, really, that they'll take the story of, we're not liberating people. We're not doing anything for Mother Russia here. We're really destroying a country, and so much. I'm so thankful that so many of the beautiful churches that are there don't seem to have been annihilated, because that would be such an incredible loss. But the people of of Ukraine, and now I hope they press on to Berdansk, to Zaporozhye, to those places that need to be set free. There will be dancing in the streets all over Ukraine when we see victory.
Well, let's pray for that, and hopefully let's ask the Christians in Russia, please pray for peace.
Yes.
Please pray for your government to change its mind, that this whole myth of a greater Russia would go away and there could be peace.